So the next conference we're going to talk about, whilst I half-heartedly try to do the ironing, is the Potsdam conference, which was from July to August of 1945. And it was very different to the Yalta conference. First of all, the war had ended. And so they've really got to decide, this Grand Alliance, how Europe is going to be after the war. And this, in my opinion, is one of the key reasons why a Cold War happened at all. Cold War is quite difficult, isn't it? Because it's not like a normal war where it's easy to say it started here, because this is when the first person got shot or when that side declared war. There was no declaration of war, and it wasn't like you could choose a shot and that was when the war began. So historians are divided over that. But part of the reason is definitely because the ideology of capitalism and communism were so different and weren't very compatible with each other. But from 1917 to 45, they'd not really come to blows too significantly, apart from maybe at the start. And now they had no choice but to make decisions together. Really important decisions that would concern the entire world. And because they had such different views of the world, and they were coming from such different backgrounds and different ideologies, I think this is a key reason why the Cold War kicked off at all. Anyway, between the Yalta Conference in February and then July, the war had ended, but also Roosevelt had died. And Roosevelt had had a fairly decent working relationship with Stalin during the war, although there is some evidence that after the Yalta Conference, when Stalin didn't look like he was going to have any sort of free democratic elections in Poland, it looked like Roosevelt was starting to get a bit fed up with him. He still definitely had a fairly decent working relationship, and certainly a better working relationship than Truman did. Truman was a bit no-nonsense. For example, something you won't find in the textbook, but I found today, is that 11 days after taking in office and being sworn in as president, Truman summoned the Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov. Or there was a meeting arranged anyway, whether he was summoned or not, I don't know. And Molotov turned up. And he was very much a no-nonsense Soviet. He's quite a famous Soviet foreign minister. He did a lot of important things. And Truman basically said to him, right, this Poland thing, we're not happy about it. Something along those lines. He was very stern with Molotov. There was none of this diplomacy or anything. He just basically got him told. Molotov, when he came out, basically he said something along the lines of, I have never been talked to like that. And what Truman replied to this statement from Molotov with was, if you carry out your agreements and you won't get talked to like that. So he's basically saying, I'm going to talk to you however I want if you don't keep your promises. Which is a total difference to Roosevelt. And it's 11 days in, Truman's saying, do it. And one of these reasons for this is because Truman and the Americans were developing the atomic bomb, which they actually used on Japan just a few days after the Potsdam conference had ended. And he made sure he told the Soviets and the other allies that the atomic bomb was ready to go. So Truman felt that he could boss the Soviets around a little bit, and the impact of that, he hoped, was that the Soviets would sort of go, oh yes, well they've got the atomic bomb, so we'll do what he says. But what actually happened is Stalin did something equivalent to, you can't push me around, I'm going to be extra stubborn. Let's start with what they disagreed upon at Potsdam. And two key things, it's Poland and Germany. They're two hot points in the Cold War, certainly at the start and pretty much all the way through. Definitely Germany. And the Soviets had been damaged terrifically by the war, or horrifically if you like. And just the scale of the destruction, the Germans had burned things, raped people, murdered people. 25 million Soviets estimated to have died during the war. Which is a statistic we keep banding around, but it's unbelievable. And so the Soviets, well, they wanted reparation for that. They want reparations, which is like the country thing for compensation. But they also wanted to, or Stalin, because he was paranoid fairly naturally, he was worried about the possibility of future invasion from Germany when they'd been given time to recover. So he wanted to cripple Germany so that would be impossible. Another thing which isn't in the textbook, which you often read, is that Stalin is even asking perhaps for Germany to be divided into 6 different countries, so there was no united Germany. But USA and Britain, they put paid to that and said, no, that's not going to happen. So the alternative is to charge them tons of money so they can't recover economically, so they can't then pose a threat to the Soviet Union. And also the bonus of that is the reparations taken can be given to the Soviet Union. Everyone agreed, and it's quite obvious, that the Soviets had borne the brunt of the Nazi war machine, so they should get the most reparations. And all of the countries agreed that they should take reparations from their own zone, the 4 zones of Germany, except that the French, British and Americans would send some reparations from their zone to the Soviet Union because they'd suffered the most. So they kind of agreed on that bit, but they didn't agree on how much should be charged, because whilst the Soviets are demanding some serious reparations to cripple Germany and to get something back from what they'd suffered, the Americans and the British did not want to make the same mistakes they'd made after the First World War, where the Treaty of Versailles was imposed on Germany, and it was exceptionally harsh, and, well, it was one of the things which is cited as to why the Germans were prepared to vote and support Hitler, because Hitler promised that he would return Germany to greatness, which for a brief time he could argue he did before taking them to an even bigger catastrophe. Anyway, Britain and America were not willing to repeat the mistakes they'd made by imposing such a harsh treaty on Germany. So compromises had to be made there, and nobody was particularly happy. Also, Stalin insisted at first that each of the powers controlling Germany, so France, Britain, America and the Soviet Union, should govern their own quarter of Germany, rather than it all being governed centrally. Now, he was later to suggest some joint ventures where everybody governs Germany from the centre, when he was worried about this potential for a division of Germany and being outnumbered. But at this stage, he thinks everybody governs their own zone, because then they won't get outvoted, because of course Britain, France and America are capitalists, 3 versus 1 communist country, the Soviet Union. And so everyone kind of agrees to that, say, okay, we'll all look after our own individual zone. And if I rewind a little bit, another reason which I've just noticed on my envelope of things to remember to tell you is that a reason why America and Britain did not want for the German economy to be crippled too badly with massive reparations is because they wanted the Germans to be able to pay for the raw materials that Britain and America were providing them with, rather than it just being handed out as aid. So Poland, well, it's been a bit of a sticking point. They promised free elections, but to Stalin, free elections meant you could choose who you wanted, so long as they were communist. And Stalin is also quite adamant that he wants to make sure there is a friendly Poland on the Soviet Union's borders. If we rewind, the Poles invaded in the 1920s. The Germans invaded through Poland before that in the First World War, and then again in the Second World War. So you can kind of see perhaps why he wants to have a friendly Poland on the Soviet Union's borders. But he can't have that if he gave free elections, because the likelihood of the Poles voting in a government which was friendly to the Soviet Union was slim to none. And so there was still a lot of tension over Poland at the Potsdam conference, because the Soviets were not willing to back down and let there be totally free elections in Poland. What else can I tell you about? Well, though they did agree on something, they agreed eventually, after a lot of reluctance, that they would move Poland west. So the Soviet Union got a chunk of Poland that became part of Russia, and Poland in return got a section of Germany which became part of Poland. So Poland effectively moved that way on the map. Britain and America weren't particularly happy about this, but what could they do? The Soviet Union were in Poland and occupying it. And there was a lot of tension over that particular thing as well. Now, the Soviets also asked to have a position in the occupying army of Japan when Japan fell. America were like, no, that is not happening. I could imagine that Truman had probably felt that it would have been a mistake to for the Americans not to rush and to try to take Germany before the Soviets got there. So there was no way they were going to give them a role in Japan if they could possibly help it. And there's a part of Germany in the west which is called the Ruhr region, R-U-H-R, which is full of industry. And the Soviets said they wanted to have some control over some parts of industry in the Ruhrland, and again that was denied by Britain and America, who said, no, you've got your zone, you can have that bit. So yeah, Potsdam, this time, I say Yalta, behind the scenes there were grumblings, there was evidence that they weren't perhaps getting on particularly well. At Potsdam it wasn't behind the scenes, they were quite clearly not getting on, partly because Roosevelt had been replaced by Truman. And also what I haven't mentioned is partway through the conference there was a general election in Britain, and to everyone's surprise Churchill lost and Clement Attlee was put in power, and he joined the conference partway through. He didn't really do that much that was significant. So at Potsdam things are starting to divide, things are starting to break down, largely over Germany and reparations and how much they should have to pay, and over Poland, its borders, and also this issue of free elections in Poland, which weren't really happening. And this interpretation of the word democracy. So there we go.